Hello, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. I have Phil Torres here with me. Phil, how are you doing?
Good. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Thanks
Good.
for chatting with me. So, want to give you a little bit of background about how we came to be talking today?
Oh, do I want to do that? I would be happy
Yeah.
to.
You could
Yes.
introduce yourself as well first, maybe.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a writer. I do freelance writing, but I also do a fair amount of scholarship. I just published a book called Morality, Foresight, and Human Flourishing. So I have sort of a long history in the atheist community, and was a quite enthusiastic and a vocal fan and supporter and so on of a number of individuals in this community who I have since been unimpressed with, one could say, or perhaps outright kind of disappointed with what I see as a kind of strain of anti-intellectualism that has infected the community. And one of the unfortunate consequences of that, I believe, or I at least would argue, is that some very good ideas, the credibility of some very good ideas has been undercut and vitiated by the words and behaviors of some of the people. And I think that's really bad, because I also believe quite strongly, we could talk about this if you'd like, that this is a truly crucial juncture in our species' career on Earth. Climate policies that are implemented today might affect us for literally another 10,000 years, and so on. But point being, this is a crucial moment when we need skeptical individuals, rational people, people who care, who put epistemology before ideology more than ever before. So it's for me, especially, there's a sense of like urgency to my frustration with some of these good ideas sort of being compromised, or at least that's what I would argue.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I'm a big fan of epistemology, as you probably know. I'm doing this essay thing, and sure, I'd love to talk about these potential disappointments in some people and how that may affect the ability to try and like promote this way of talking with people, because I believe in it as well. I think it's very crucial in this day and age. Cool. So
I actually would argue, by the way, that, and I've written this. I've written this in articles before, that I just don't think there's any topic more important than epistemology. I mean, it underlies every domain of intellectual activity. You know, it's so foundational, whether you're talking about science or humanities or politics and so on. Like, an understanding of what constitutes a justified belief is just so very important.
Have you seen that one?
I'm sorry?
XKBC epistemology comic?
No.
I'll have to show it to you later.
Okay.
It's got like a seesaw, and there's this different fields of sciences, but like there's a guy like holding up the seesaw, and that's epistemology. Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. Cool. So, all right, we can. I guess we can just get into it and try and just hash out these differences. Like, I really want to be a someone who does like a civil conversation and who has who gives off that I try to be intellectual myself, and I try to do it. I try to live up to these virtues of epistemology and SE. So hopefully this goes okay. So did you get my link to this Kialo thing? I'll share it on my screen as well.
I did, yes.
If you want to just watch it on the stream, I can share my screen.
Okay.
And we can just, like, I've tried to lay out your points as I see them, and feel free to like correct them.
Okay.
So I think like this is our main contention. The street epistemology should be like publicly distance itself from Peter Boghossian. Is that accurate?
I feel a little weird making it that personal, but Yes, I think the street epistemology sort of approach, this gentle Socratic elicitation of ideas from people through questioning them and interrogating their various beliefs is really good. And I'm certainly not the only one who has suggested that the originator is not always a particularly good exemplar of this view. So I have had concerns about, like, how is it that a movement, I mean, there's something called genetic fallacy, right? I mean, you don't judge in this case, the importance or the significance of an idea based on who is the progenitor of that idea. But the genetic fallacy is easy to ignore. You know, I mean, there is a kind of guilt by association that occurs, again, sort of an undercutting of credibility, particularly when a movement. One of my biggest problems is that a lot of people in the new atheist or skeptic community have been, like, pretty silent about some of the really weird stuff that's gone on. And that seems to me quite problematic.
Okay. Yeah, like,
I hope that makes sense. Tell me if it doesn't.
I think I understand. Yeah, the genetic fallacy, like, just because Peter Boghossian originated it, yeah, and he, like, maybe does some questionable things, problematic things, like, that doesn't really apply to, like, the validity of SE the movement, but it still has this, like, it still gives that type of what do you call it, the, like, reputational hazard we can get into.
Yeah, it's a sort of thing, like, you know, I evangelized, if you will, if you don't mind the term, for SE quite a bit, and then it just sort of came to a point when I worried that people people who were initially somewhat enamored with the basic ideas thought, oh yeah, this is really cool to, you know, to conduct this kind of Socratic dialogue with individuals on the street, whatever. I was worried that they were going to research it too much, and they're going to come across some, like, really bad tweets or something, and then that was going to really weaken the case that one should indeed take this seriously, and it would make my job more difficult.
Right.
As an evangelist for SE.
Yeah, so you're saying if people want to learn about SE, they'll learn about the book, and then they'll learn about Boghossian, and then they might see some questionable tweets from Boghossian and might, like, undermine learning SE. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, more or less. And this isn't mere speculation. I mean, I've talked to a number of people who have essentially been attracted to the SE approach, and then later came back to me. It was just like, what is going on? This is crazy, and you know, it's somehow clouded their view. It's colored their opinion, I should say, of the whole SE approach, and that's just such a shame. It's the problems that we're discussing here are extremely avoidable. You know, if people just behave themselves and I think sort of put basic epistemic and maybe moral values into practice a little bit more than be in a different situation. That's what I would argue, at least. Yeah,
I've seen a little bit of that as well, like people getting a little bit turned off by SE from some of what Boghossian has done. But okay, so let me go back to this. So have you heard of Kialo? Do you know about this thing?
No, I don't.
It's basically just a way to, like, map out arguments.
Okay.
Because I can, like, see how I can, like, click on this one and see, like, what supports it. So it's like we can really, like, dive deep into the reasons, at least, for each argument, for each position. So, like, I'm not saying this is absolutely true or valid or sound, but, like, these are just some ideas I've put forward that we can kind of just discuss. So but like one con to this would be like Peter Boghossian's reputation no longer impacts SE to a sufficient degree, good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some supporting stuff for that is like SE is now more like way more than Boghossian, and Boghossian's book, like we no longer need that to learn SE. We have
Mm-hmm.
tons of extra materials. Like really, people don't even need to read the book. And I've known people who like do SE who have never read the book and don't plan to or don't care to.
Yeah.
And also that like most people did not actually hear about SE from Boghossian.
Mm-hmm.
I actually did like a survey in the SE Facebook group like earlier today.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that.
So this is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Looks like mostly people heard about it from Anthony Magnabosco nowadays.
Yeah.
And this was just like from a couple hours ago. This may be different now, but it's like it seems to be like over half is not Boghossian at this point.
Yeah, that's pretty significant.
So that's something, I guess. And I think Boghossian has said himself, like he wants to distance himself from SE, so people don't like see him as like a pope of SE or like some type of authority figure to it. And I guess to kind of reduce this, reputational hazard issue, but like he's still significantly a part of it. I think, at least he's not totally away from it for sure. So, so I think there's some merit there. There's maybe some other issues there, but it's something. But we can get into like what Boghossian has done, and we can maybe chat about that and see if they're actually like reputational hazards or like something we really need to be concerned about. Do you want to do that for a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, and I've seen some of your posts, like that you shared publicly, and also the ones you did on the SE Facebook group. So maybe we could take it like one by one, or like I'll just ask you, like, what's your main objection? Is it one of these I've listed here, or is there something else?
So I would organize. I would say that the. So I'm reading these in real time.
Sure.
Some of these, perhaps all of them, I would say, are symptomatic. I mean, they're symptoms of. Well, I mean, sort of. I would argue a failure of moral thoughtfulness, a failure to take facts seriously. So, for example, the gender studies hoax was the expose was hastily published in Skeptic magazine, and as a result, it contains a demonstrable and quite glaring factual mistake, which this gets a bit esoteric here, but if people want to go and read about this, which is an okay journal focused on masculinity studies, not gender studies. It's even stunning to begin with that they thought they should submit a gender studies article to a journal that focuses on masculinity studies, because they're different things. So anyways, Norma then rejected it right away without editor looked at it, was like, this is just not suitable for publication. So then Norma suggested that they submit it to Cogent Social Sciences, which is a pay-to-publish humanities journal. And the pay-to-publish model in the humanities is not nearly as prevalent as it is within the sciences. So anyways, they ended up publishing in Cogent Social Sciences, and then they wrote with the expose in Skeptic that the quote-unquote damning claim that ties their whole argument together. This is the crux upon which their argument that gender studies as an entire field is an intellectual scam, is that Norma recommended Cogent Social Sciences. Well, it turns out that Norma didn't. It was Taylor and Francis. It's the publishing company that sends an automatic email when your paper gets rejected in Norma, to publish journal namely cogent social sciences. So that was, and I pointed this out to them before basically everybody in that whole thing blocked me or threatened me, threatened to ruin my career. So I pointed that fact out, and I even told Michael Shermer, like, this, you know, honestly, the intellectually honest thing to do would be to retract the paper because it contains a major flaw. And there hasn't even been a public acknowledgement among that group. And that really, for me, I have to say, there were many incidents before that were accumulating and sort of pushing me as somebody who really, really, really wants to care more than anything about the facts. And I think my past intellectual history of changing my mind a million times, sometimes, you know, really significantly about various issues, is evidence that I'm sort of blown around by the winds of evidence. So this particular episode was, for me, was just a real turning point where it's like, I feel like I'm dealing, these individuals are ideologues, and they, yeah. So that's, and I mean, there are various other things, bits of chicanery that surrounded that as well, like Peter's saying repeatedly on Facebook that we never paid for the article to be published in Cogent, which is technically true, but only because Cogent Social Sciences just never billed them for reasons that remain unclear to this day. So they agreed to pay money to get the paper published, and then, you know, the bill got lost or whatever. It's just really disingenuous to go online and say, no, we didn't actually pay for or, you know, this wasn't paid to publish because we never paid. But that's just an accident that happened.
So you're saying this hoax that he did is more symptomatic of a problem, and like I've gone through and trying to like find like your positions about this, and I'd love to like maybe explore like the maybe objections coming from you, and then like some of the responses to those objections, to kind of just give people, you know, a more general overview.
Sure.
And like, and this Kialo thing, it's really cool. I can post a link in the chat after, and people can like come and like comment on it and like and see, or maybe suggest other pieces of evidence, or pieces of pros or cons. And
yeah,
so I'd love to get people's feedback on it.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
So like you brought up that basically the hoax targeted a bad journal, Cogent Social Sciences, and Norma as well, which was not represents gender studies. Is that what you're saying?
That's one of the, yeah, that's part of it for sure.
Yeah, part of it. Yeah, and you mentioned before that it was first rejected by Norma. And also, I think you mentioned that the editorial board from that journal has no background in the field. Like, they have no single senior editor, stuff like that. Yeah. And also, the publishing company, Taylor and Francis, recommended Cogent for monetary rather than academic reasons.
Yeah, Taylor and Francis rather than Norma.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and that was not the claim that was made in the Skeptic expose. It was that specifically that Norma, and they of course identified that as I mentioned before, as the damning claim. So that, to me, that just really should have. I mean, putting my, you know, I mean, the ultimate sort of like moral test is reversing roles, and you know, so if I were in that situation, I would feel like it morally behooves me to acknowledge that like a mistake has been made. And in fact, I have made mistakes in my own writing in the past, and people have pointed out, and it's not fun going out and saying like I made a mistake, but you know, it's also a sign of your intellectual integrity, you know, to go out and.
Yeah, I think the mistake was actually part of their argument. I think like their article in Skeptic had like two prongs. It's like possible things going wrong or things not going ideally in gender studies, and also like this other thing with like pay to publish journals with very low standards. The existence of those things, like it's also a problem. So, and it's kind of funny, like the more of a problem the pay to publish journals are, the kind of less their other argument gets credit for. At least like that's how I see it. but they're both kind of two problems.
Yeah.
And I kind of see them as like both, like they both have a little bit of merit, especially. Well, I think the existence of paid and published journals has maybe a little more merit, but we can talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So
my sense, if you don't mind, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Okay. So my sense is that the two prongs are very much in tension. You know, if you want to expose a field as having lax substandards, you know, lax intellectual standards, let's say, you don't go and pick a journal has super low, you know, a really high acceptance rate. Mm-hmm. That's just, you know, that's there's sort of a you know, a inverse proportional relation between these two prongs. So I feel like even just the logical structure of that argument was pretty flawed, in the sense that the conclusions don't really follow from the premises. I mean, I think they did something interesting and important with respect to pay to publish journals. It is a huge, huge issue that there are these really low quality journals out there that are in some way predatory, and you know, will. So I mean, it was even the case that at least one of the editors on the Cogent Social Science boards had no idea that. I think it was her. I can't remember. I could look up details, but there was at least one who came out afterwards. It was like, I had no idea I was a part of this. You know, in other words, that's how problematic the journal is. So,
mm-hmm. And I think another point was made was like the hoax is like just a one-off and proves nothing. That's another thing.
I think Sokol clearly understood that. Mm-hmm. If you've read some of his writings in the that were published after his particular hoax with the journal out of Duke University called I'm forgetting it off the top of my head. It'll come to me in just a second, but it was one of the major journals at the time publishing articles within the sort of postmodern intellectual tradition. And so he did the right thing. He targeted, you know, the very top one. As it happens, they didn't have peer review. It was just his particular paper was just read by the editors and then published. Mm. And he was quite clear about the implications that it hasn't undercut an entire field. It's a datum, and it's not a trivial datum either. It's pretty fascinating and pretty impressive to have fooled, you know, some leading experts in their particular field.
Right.
But yeah, and in contrast, there were just a lot of really grand and grandiose claims, at least in my judgment, that were surrounding the Boghossian James Lindsay hoax, including for people like Michael Shermer, who just you know, I thought they were better than that. You know, right. And it doesn't make me happy to say that at all, but that's my view.
Okay, so maybe we need some cons that go to this claim that Boghossian does not make the claim that this one experiment alone proves the problem. That he intended to test the hypothesis that his desire for a certain moral view of the world to be validated could overcome the critical assessment required for legitimate scholarship. Mm-hmm. And he claimed on the evidence our suspicion was justified, that there was a kind of a desire for a certain moral view of the world to be validated. So
I would say that is very much vitiated by the fact that it was a really, as they pointed out, it's a really low-level journal that has a monetary incentive to accept papers, and it's a journal that has nothing to do with gender studies. I mean, it's Cogent Social Sciences, and as I pointed out in an article that got me in a lot of trouble with these guys, rather than initiating debate, if you read the end of my article, it's quite clear that there's an open invitation for conversation. Instead, everybody blocked me, banned me, threaten to, this or that. So, yeah, I think that's, there wasn't, I guess I was going to say that there was not a single editor, senior editor of, I don't know, like 10 or something at Cogent Social Sciences who has any background in gender studies. I mean, I listed some of them. It's almost comical, but one was like, has a degree in sports management.
I think you said like tourism, criminology, development planning, geography, sport management, and communication sciences.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So it's just not, it's not the right journal. I don't think the evidence at all supports the conclusion that the paper was accepted because it endorses and forwards some particular moral view of the world.
Yeah. And I guess I think I'm trying to guess for what their response would be, but I think I've seen on Twitter that at least James Lindsay said it's hard to tell what kind of a vanity journal is based on a legitimate pay to publish journal. Maybe that's true. I'm not sure. There's also some other objections, if I could share.
Oh yeah, sure.
It said it is a part of a highly regarded Taylor and Francis group, which confirms that Cogent offers thorough scholarly peer review and has all the traditional values and high standards associated with Taylor and Francis and Rutledge at its core.
Who said that? I'm sorry.
It's from another blog, and Helen Procrose, she put a bunch of stuff together, and I haven't looked at where this exactly comes from, but that's just one claim. And then also that the language and argument of the hoax piece is indistinguishable from sincere gender studies publications from a range of academic journals, maybe even higher up, more reputable journals. I can't be it seems that way, at least to my eye, but I may be wrong about that. And it's not highlighted as a problem in the much relied upon Beale's list of predatory journals, and was recommended to Boghossian by the Norma Journal. But as you said before, it's for monetary, not academic reasons. So,
and also part of the really, really crucial point that I was making earlier is that it wasn't recommended by the Norma Journal. It wasn't any of the scholars who are associated with
was it just
masculinity
an email response, automatic?
I'm sorry?
Was it just an automatic email thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe but even though that, wouldn't the editors be responsible for that email thing to happen?
So I had extensive conversations with many individuals from Taylor and Francis and Norma, and the lead editor says that, and this certainly squares with my own understanding of a peer review, having published a number of articles, academic articles. There are so many submissions that the editors don't. The editors have a template, and you're inside the whatever program it is through which you submit your articles, and you just hit a reject button, and it sends an automatic email. And so when I talked to the Norma guy, he was like, "Yeah, I had no idea." He's like, he said, to be honest, what did he say? So I would have to double check this, but I seem to recall him saying that 2 years ago, Taylor and Francis suggested that they will start then recommending their pay-to-publish journals in order to increase revenue. And I'm almost certain he said that he opposed that initially. So when I contacted him, he was really surprised. He's like, I had no idea that they were doing this. And but I would be happy to double check the emails just to confirm that my memory is accurate. So, and I mean, another thing that sort of comes to mind is
sure.
With respect to the claim that the language that they use mirrors in some crucial way the kind of Baroque turgid language that is is infamous among like postmodern thinkers, writers, literary critics, and so on. I would just like really hasten to add, I think if the hoax were thoughtful, if like real thought had gone into this, people would have, the individuals involved would have taken the time not only to double check that Norma actually submitted, or Norma actually recommended cogent social sciences. I mean, that's, you gotta check stuff like that. But even more, you take the time to learn a sufficient amount about the field of gender studies to be able to articulate a truly substantive critique of the field. And go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think they say like they deliberately didn't do that. Like they didn't want to learn about it because they wanted it to be more absurd. So like the less they know, the more absurd it is, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why it was immediately without peer review rejected from Norma, and it ended up in a paid, published journal. It's, I mean, as someone who, I mean, I'm trained, I have a master's in neuroscience. I'm trained in the analytic philosophical tradition, but I also am somewhat conversant with critical theory and postmodernism, post-structuralism, post-colonialism, stuff like that. Mostly because my wife is a professor at Penn, whose work sort of touches up against this stuff. And so I remember after the hoax was published, writing James Lindsay an email saying, like, I really wish you could just have like 2 hours some evening chatting about gender studies with my wife, because there are all sorts of myths and misinformation that gets propagated through the skeptics, via Michael Shermer and Peter Boghossian, that is just not true about gender studies. And I'm not defending it. I'm just defending reality here. Like, if we want to have, it's the whole gender study hoax and the the explosion of laughter and sort of crude comments involving a lot of people in the skeptics community afterwards. To me, it was parallel to the situation of debating Obamacare, where it's like there is a real issue to discuss here with pros and cons, and but instead we're talking about death panels. Death panels are a fiction, right. And so it's just incredibly frustrating, to hear, like, I know Boghossian's said so much about postmodernism. I mean, postmodernism is if you write,
it's a big thing.
Well, so gender studies is a huge sprawling field. It's not like, one little field, and you could find, it's not like a contained little realm of intellectual inquiry. You can find areas at the fringe where there is some crazy stuff going on, right? And that stuff.
I don't know too much about it. Could I bring up maybe one concern people have with gender studies, and maybe you could try and educate me about how prevalent it is?
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying gender studies in its current iteration is a legitimate field of study and did not deserve this type of hoax. Is that kind of accurate?
So I would even, for the purposes of this argument, would remain agnostic about its status as a field, and just say that the hoax was super misinformed. It hit a target that nobody understood, or attempted to hit a target that nobody understood, and then it missed the target. And anybody who knows anything about gender studies or et cetera just looked at that and went, oh my God, those dudes are so, dumb. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but I mean, that's a harsh way to put it. I'm just trying to
whatever,
recapitulate what was expressed to me by many, many people who were just like, I just can't believe that that's real.
Okay, so agnostic about it. I think, but I think the main objection most people have with gender studies is that there's a recurrent theme where the discourse is like the negation of biological reasons for describing the differentiations we see between men and women, and that stuff like warrants criticism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, is that prevalent in gender studies, you think? Like, how much of gender studies has that problem? Is that a problem?
Sorry, I'm reading some of these other things. So I am not wholly qualified to talk about this, but I suspect I'm probably more qualified than some of the people who are saying, oh, it's, they completely reject, these gender studies scholars completely reject the influence of biology on phenotypic traits like, language ability, spatial spatial capacities, and various other, sort of like sex differences. But so that being said, I could say that everybody I know who works on these issues, without a doubt, acknowledges that biology is a huge factor. I think so. I often just find I'm maybe my experience is not representative or something, but I just am oftentimes like really baffled about some of these claims. Like, yes, you will be able to find some gender studies articles about that. I have met a few people who I explicitly asked one scholar at a conference a while back if she believes that differences in that there exist gender specific features that are different and genetically based, and she said no. So, and I remember being like really shocked by that. But that is very much anomalous in my experience. I don't know. I honestly don't know anybody. I haven't read anybody, any mainstream scholar within this general neighborhood of thought who actually holds that view. If I ask my wife, she'll go, "That's crazy." Like part of what gender studies, I believe part of what some gender studies scholars are trying to do is say for the longest time, people have had this kind of biological reductionist view, and there are all sorts of binarisms, emotionality versus rationality that were seen as essential to women or men and so on, and try to determine the extent to which that's true. And it turns out that there are indeed a lot of different features, characteristics, traits that are socially influenced, highly influenced. So basically, even if you look at the history of the biological view, it wasn't that long ago that people thought there was only one biological sex, and women were just a bad version of the one sex, really? Underdeveloped or something. And then, there's just a fascinating long history with sex and gender, and was it 1800s? Pink was the manly color, blue was the feminine color, and then somehow it got inverted. So, I do think that there's a whole lot of these traits. I think focusing on the social impact with respect to male female behaviors and so on is like really important and hasn't been studied all that much. So I think gender studies is in a sense trying to offer a corrective for this.
Yeah, and I think like the intention. Sense? Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I see where you're coming from. That like gender studies has a lot of legitimate things to say, and that this part of academia needs to be there because there's a lot of history there and there's a lot of knowledge to be there to be found out about this stuff. And I think Boghossian and Lindsay were like trying to improve the quality of this section of academia. That's how that's how I think I see what they were trying to do. And another part of this is like, so you're saying maybe some people suffer from like the doctrine of the blank slate. One article I found, there's a paper by a a sociologist, Charlotta Stern.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote a paper, Undoing Insularity, a small study of gender sociality's big problem.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some interesting quotes around there. Like Charlotta Stern studied some articles, 23 gender studies articles, where she found only one referenced biological sex differences, 4 were neutral, and 15 were what she calls ideologically blinkered.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what she means by that is like, blink slate type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you have a link to this, so you can maybe check out that paper to kind of see where she's coming from.
Yeah, thanks.
No
I mean,
worries.
I would just say that that's one article. I mean, so a few things come to mind here. One is you had mentioned just a moment ago that they were ultimately trying to improve the quality of the field.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest that the way to improve the quality of the field is to engage with the field and not to publish a really, really misinformed and factually flawed hoax. That's just not the right way to do it. And even in Boghossian and Lindsay's response to, which is called something like Response to Critics, that Skeptic published as well, they argued against the criticism that they need to know gender studies in order to make substantive criticisms about it. And they brought up the Courier's reply, which is, if I remember correctly, that's a fallacy identified by P.Z. Myers initially, and it's a real fallacy. It essentially says that you can't reject the truth of some claim simply because the individual who made the claim is unfamiliar with the topic. And that makes perfect sense. It's very much in line, maybe even subsumed within the genetic fallacy. That's absolutely true. That being said, the Courier's reply is not a license to go out and speak about things you don't know. It doesn't make it okay for Donald Trump to go out and start talking about, foreign policy and international relations and uranium. I don't know if you've seen that video. If viewers haven't, go on YouTube and look up Trump uranium. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it matters that when I read that statement in Skeptic, we don't need to know gender studies to criticize it. I just literally the first thing I thought was, kids, don't listen to that. Yes, knowledge is really important. Go out and know stuff. Take the time, learn it before you criticize it. Otherwise, among the people who are in the know, who are conversant with the relevant topics, you're going to really embarrass yourself. I don't go out and suggest, publish some kind of expose in a magazine because trying to tear down cosmology in an effort to improve the quality of the field. People would look at me and go, you're an idiot for that. You don't know the first thing what you're talking about. Perhaps I'm embedded within a community of individuals who also don't know. And this distributed ignorance about topic X results in a kind of support and reinforcement of my views, or lionization of my efforts to expose cosmology or whatever. But it's just, you got to know what you're talking about. I mean, that's just epistemology 101.
Right. And I think they would say that they were just kind of trying to shine a light on some potential problems in gender studies and have some real professionals kind of look into it.
Yeah.
They're just kind of trying to do a publicity stunt for real peer review as far as I'm concerned. So I don't know if their claim that they have the authority to criticize all of gender studies by their just mere I don't know what type of authority they would have for that, but so yeah.
Well, I would also say even if that was the intention, the execution was, just a huge turnoff to anybody in that field. Even people who are critical of certain aspects of the gender studies terrain. And again, it's quite a broad field, and oftentimes you see people in the skeptics community, almost all white men, as it happens. I don't think that's an accident. Who are like, oh, look at this author. She said that all sex is rape, for example. Yeah, that's true. There was an author who wrote that, and that is highly contentious within the field. I mean, that was a cause for immense internal debate, with many, many, many authors saying that that's insane and totally reject that thesis. And then you have a bunch of people on the outside who don't take the time to actually learn about the internal conversations, who then point to that and use it as a kind of example from which to generalize, to make these much broader, stronger, overly confident statements about the nature of the field itself. So I mean, I just wish if somebody thinks that the field is problematic, then engage with the field. That's the way to do it. The hoax like this that has built on a falsehood and so on is not the way to do it. It also, I mean, you have to know that such a sloppy hoax, at least that's how I would describe it. I mean, even in their first sentence, they get Hume's law wrong, which is like really basic philosophy stuff that just made me kind of put my hand in my palm. What was I going to say? Just that, they had to have known that this would be really contentious. And in my sense, it has kind of exploded the skeptics community, which is already pretty fractured.
Right.
At least that's my diagnosis of the situation. Maybe you disagree, but
I think there is quite a divide within like the skeptic atheist community over like some social justice stuff, and I don't see like this as helping that.
Yeah.
Like I think what we're doing now is like really great. We're just kind of talking through the issues. I think another objection I found is like, people saying the hoax is just another attack on like humanities or social science. And a response to that was like Boghossian like is a philosopher, not a scientist, and like the effects of the academic shift towards postmodern thinking are a topic like within his remit. Like he might have a little bit of authority there to kind of criticize that stuff.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, he's yeah, I don't have any problem with pointing out that's absolutely true. I mean, he doesn't have I think this is on the verge of being irrelevant, but he doesn't have like a degree in philosophy. I mean, he's a what is it, doctor of education or something. But fair enough. I shouldn't even brought that up because I don't think that itself is all that relevant.
Okay.
I suppose what I would say is that the whole there's kind of this like weird obsession among certain people in the skeptics community about postmodernism. And postmodernism is not trendy these days. Most of the work I mean, there still are pockets of individuals who are working within that tradition or the critical theory tradition, so I would say two things. One is that it's just not nearly as prevalent. I mean, I would characterize the talk about postmodernism as mostly alarmist. And okay. I mean, pretty much everybody I know personally, every scholar I know whose work has something to do with the study of gender and the dynamics across time between or categories of gender, believe, if you ask them, do you believe in objective truth? They go, yeah, climate change is real. Like that's, so I'm just, that's all, on the one hand, like something that's really baffled me, this like just alarmism about postmodernism. And the other hand, like I would just add that there are many different varieties of postmodernism as well. Genealogical traditions of thought versus deconstructions traditions of thought. And some of the things that postmodernism has done, I think, is valuable. Whereas I also think there's a whole lot that it's done that's ridiculous. In particular, the notion of metaphysical construction. That we sort of create the world. That's in direct opposition to my own objective truth, scientific realist view. So yeah, I think that's a perhaps pernicious idea. In fact, I think Bruno Latour, maybe like 5 years ago, gave a talk in which he expressed regret for having contributed to a epistemic attitude according to which one should question whether or not certain facts about the physical universe are indeed facts. And he tied it in specifically to climate change and said, if I had anything to do with this, I think that was terrible, and climate change is real. So yeah, I think there's definitely some stuff that is it deserves to be harshly criticized, but at the same time, yeah, there's postmodernism. Just when my wife got her PhD at Duke University, which was the ground zero for the Sokol hoax, and I'm still forgetting what the journal was called. Social Context, I want to say, something like that. But anyways, she said that if she had even mentioned the word postmodernism in her dissertation, the professors in the English department would have said, no, don't do that. Like, that's not cool. It's like it has the same status as like a philosopher talking about verificationism. I don't know if you're familiar with that, right. But it was like a very central positivist, logical positivist view that was just like real hard-nosed, scientific, and then it turned out that it had some major problems. And people are still kind of verificationist a bit these days. Dennett, in fact, kind of holds that view. Myself, even, but you would never, like, you're not a full-blown verificationist. You're a reformed verificationist. So, yeah, I don't know if that helps. My rambling response here helps at all. Add a bit of clarity to the.
So what I'm hearing you say is that, like, postmodernism is a really big thing, and it's not too much of a problem really in gender studies or academia in general, and that it's kind of alarmist to worry about it. And
it's a small crowd. Yeah, this is my analysis, and I'm sorry for interrupting you. I'll say real fast. My analysis, and perhaps I'm wrong. I'm totally open to that, but my take is that it's a small crowd out there. I mean, gender studies is a tiny field with like no power. This gets at another issue, I should say real fast, is the issue of prioritization. One thing that the effective altruist movement, which is actually has strong intellectual affinities with the SE community. One of the things that it does really good is it emphasizes the importance of cause prioritization, and just sort of creating a moral triage of sorts. Like, here are the bigger issues. How important is it? How neglected is the topic? And how crowded is the field that's working on it? And you kind of use those criteria to determine what you ought to go and work on. So it's another thing that's just weird and can only be explained, I believe, through some sort of ideological bias, is why postmodernism, feminism, and gender studies have been such a target. I mean, we live in a world where the doomsday clock is 2.5 minutes to midnight, and Donald Trump, who has close ties to the alt-right and white nationalism stuff, is the most powerful man in the world. Gender studies is nothing. And those really annoying kids on campus that also really bother me, they have like no political power. They're utterly insignificant, I would argue, at least, when juxtaposed next to some of the other problems like the alt-right and Donald Trump and so on.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think I understand. Yeah.
Okay.
And also, I think I see Boghossian as like in a similar vein. Like he really cares about climate change. Like, he tweets about it a lot, at least when I hear him speak, he's saying the same similar things. Like our priorities are kind of out of whack. We need to be talking about climate change, and I kind of see like he sees some of this stuff as like a threat to epistemology in a kind of way. That there's a little bit of like bad stuff going on in academia that prevents people from like valuing objective truth and trying to like figure out what's actually real. So I kind of see that Hume is like caring about this stuff because he cares about truth so much, and he needs truth in order to solve problems like climate change.
Yeah,
I think that's where he's coming from, at least.
Yeah, I mean that I don't know either way. I feel like there's what immediately comes to mind is like if you care about truth, get your facts right in your articles, you know. And when you tweet stuff, like don't tweet you know, claims that can't be supported by robust evidence. You know, I mean, part of the issue, it seems to be for me, is a what I would describe as a marked inconsistency between some stated values and then some actions. Okay. And yeah, I mean, I think again, I asked Shermer shortly before he decided he never wanted to talk to me again for the Salon article that I published, that you know, the hoax article really should have been retracted. I mean, that's what articles with major factually incorrect statements, that's what happens to them, or ought to happen to them. So I know we focused a lot on the hoax. I mean, there are various other things that could be discussed that I find extremely concerning. For example, just real fast, there are many cases recently, even, of, for example, Black scholars who have been deplatformed. There was one, I don't know, a couple months ago, who canceled a talk because of death threats. And Donald Trump, of course, has I consider to be by far the biggest threat to free speech right now in the world, in the Western developed world. You know, he said some things about Black football players that is really concerning, about how they should be fired for protesting racial injustice. And consistently, a lot of these people in the skeptic community are utterly silent about that stuff. But when Milo Yiannopoulos gets deplatformed, it's just a flurry of tweets. And so this is yet another sort of reputational hazard. People on the outside looking in see somebody like Michael Shermer or some of Boghossian's tweets and go like, what is this weird asymmetry between the, you know, supporting, vociferously supporting people like Milo and, you know, really individuals I would describe as among the most gleefully immoral public figures out there today, who stand for essentially everything, the opposite of every bit of moral progress that Michael Shermer talks about in his book, The Moral Arc. Right. And yet there's just this incredible focus on supporting the white nationalists, and totally ignoring all of the many cases of really bad stuff that has to do with free speech and free expression and so on, that happens to people of color and so on.
So you're saying they kind of stand up for the free speech of these like nefarious people instead of like other people sometimes, or that's just the consistent pattern you see? Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the inconsistency is hard to explain, except that there's some kind of bias. I mean, anybody who looks from the outside is going to go like, what are these guys kind of like? Are they sympathetic with white nationalists? Because there was literally just a Black guy who was scholar who was deplatformed because of alt-right threats or something, and it's just silence. I mean, even the case of the so in other words, another way to put that is if there's a choice to side with, for example, people who are protesting police shootings of unarmed black people and a white nationalist, they consistently side with the white nationalist, come to their defense rather than defense of other people. And another example of this is the flurry of post-Weinstein accusations from women. And it's just, I mean, rather than tweeting about like the fact that rape culture is real and like a lot of women have awful experiences, it's their tweets about how feminism is destroying the world and it's the worst thing in the world, or the body habitus of third wave men who support third wave feminism is such and such, and that just kind of baffles me. Another issue is like I would be far more willing to align myself with some of these people if there was just a consistent, fair defense of free speech or something like that, rather than just defending the white nationalists, which is a huge turnoff to me, because I'm also not super happy with some of the more radical social justice people. I've seen the videos from Reed College, and I think they're ridiculous. But
yeah, I don't know. Maybe I very much doubt that it's some type of like bias towards like these nefarious groups. Like I could think of some possible reasons. Like it's just like our social media bubbles, like the people we follow, like we see a bunch of things that are people on each side kind of see as like the worst examples of stuff, and like we have to like try and just talk about whatever we see in that way. And maybe they just don't see this stuff, or like I've seen a little bit on my timeline of like them trying to stick up for the free speech of like football players and stuff like that. So I don't see too much of a disparity, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, I could too, absolutely. I mean, I follow like Jerry Coyne's blog pretty closely, and I mean, he's in that same kind of circle. And I would say, and again, people can question me, go look for themselves. But I mean, the focus is just overwhelmingly on the poor white nationalists. I mean, Jerry Coyne had, I don't know, like 4 posts about some guy whose Trump hat was ripped off his head on a college campus. And it's like, that is not the most important thing happening. It is really dumb. But also, like, what about the black guy who was just shot, by the police because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time? I mean, that's. What about the Ferguson emails that were released with the N-word all over the place? It's a really significant thing. And the other thing I would really urge, and I certainly don't see myself as a paragon in any respect whatsoever. But I mean, so that being said, I would urge people to get outside of your information bubble. I mean, I remember Sean Carroll, the cosmologist, tweeted like, I don't know, 6 months ago or something, that he started following people that he wouldn't normally follow, namely more women and more people of color. And he said what he learned is that he ended up following a bunch of people he should have been following all the time, all along. And I'm not it would be bad news if I were held up as an example of this, but I've really tried to get outside my bubble. My Facebook feed has the occasional alt-writer, the guy who has a number of them actually who are denizens of my Facebook page. I go to Breitbart once a week and torture myself a little bit. But it's just really important to get a fuller picture. I mean, this goes back to like the importance of knowledge. Like if you're going to criticize gender studies, like know gender studies. If you're going to talk about like how unjust all of the problems with the social justice warrior kind of thing and Black Lives Matter and so on, like, but do some research about that. Like where did the term Black Lives Matter come from? Like it came from a specific article which said all lives matter, white lives matter, but also Black Lives Matter. And that's where the phrase came from. So it's, yeah, I just think if you're going to talk about this stuff, it just behooves the rational person to be gentle you proportion your beliefs to the evidence, and be gentle when you're not so sure, and then be heavy-handed when somebody says, creationism is true, and you go, no, like that I'm willing to pound my fist on. But you got to know what you're talking about. If you don't know, that's fine. That's fine. This is what the division of intellectual labor is all about. But you
Great. So I think we've gone over an hour, and this has been a really nice chat. I just want to leave you with like one other thing. Yeah, I totally agree about like trying to expand our bubbles, like following people we don't follow that often or look into. Like I did for myself, like following like Steven Crowder and what's his name from the Daily Wire, another one. So that's been interesting. But I'm also like, I've really been getting into these ideas from Jonathan Haidt, like from The Righteous Mind. Have you read that book?
I've read parts of it, but I have not read the whole thing.
Oh man, I think the ideas from that book really have helped me a lot, like seeing things much more clearly these past few years. And I would really recommend like checking those things out. It's been really helpful.
Thank you.
Sure. Cool. So any last words? I think this is really nice, and I'll leave the link to the Kialo. People can suggest any more objections, pros and cons, and maybe like in a few weeks, once this is all kind of cleared out, we can chat again and see what happens. Yeah, that would be great. I don't. There are no further thoughts that occur to me except to say that I hope I didn't talk too much. No, that's fine. Okay, I didn't mean to ramble on and on verbosely too often. So yeah, if you forgive me for that. That's fine. I just wanted to be a good representative of the SE community. Like I wanted to listen to what people had to say and trying to just understand them. Yeah, thank you. Sure thing. Cool. Well, thanks again, Phil. Chat soon. Thank you. Yeah, take care. See you. Bye, guys.